Chapter 7. In the first council session the following week, Ashe was distracted the entire meeting. Try as he might, he just could not find focus on the conversation and debate over the updated tax plan. Or was it trade agreements this time? He didn't know, and, unfortunately, didn't care. His mind was still on the ball, how he arrived, a man of mystery, as regal and noble as Dimitri, how he shared a dance with the prince, how they almost kissed. Ashe shook his head, drawing a concerned gaze from Dimitri. Before the prince could ask him if he was all right, Ashe smiled and nodded at him, hoping to show he was fine. His act must have worked, since Dimitri returned the smile, the prince's eyes shining that bright, brilliant blue that took Ashe's breath away. He really needed to stop thinking like that, giving in to his fantasies. Royalty doesn't fall in love with the common folk in real life, just in the stories. And Ashe was no storied hero or protagonist. He was just a man. A boy, really, who lucked in on a small portion of nobility. There was nothing special about him. Finally, thank the goddess, the council adjourned for the day, and Ashe moved to make his escape before Dimitri or Dudu could hold him back. He needed time away from the prince to clear his head and get back to normal. Unfortunately, fate is a cruel mistress, and someone else called to him before he left the council chamber. Lord Ubert, a moment if you please. Ashe turned to Cornelia, the royal advisor, surprise written on his face. Oh, of course, Lady Cornelia. He stepped towards her so the other men could exit the council, blessedly Prince Dimitri among them. After a moment, it was just him and Cornelia, alone in the empty room. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing off of the walls. How may I assist you, my lady? Cornelia was silent, typing and swiping on her tablet. Ashe almost thought he was being ignored before the advisor spoke. I wanted to ask you about the ball, she began, still not looking at him. Ashe stiffened. Why did Cornelia want to ask him about the ball? Did she know he was there? Did she see him and Dimitri steal away from the celebration? Before he could get lost in panicked thoughts, she continued. As you've heard, the prince shared a dance with an unknown nobleman. The mystery man accidentally left his ring behind with the prince. I was wondering if perhaps you had seen this man, or knew where we may find him. The prince is insistent on returning the item himself. Is that so? He replied, hoping his voice wouldn't betray his nervousness. I'm afraid I won't be of any assistance, my lady. I was under the weather that night and was not in attendance. Cornelia stopped swiping and typing. She looked at Ashe like a serpent ready to strike. Oh, no, she asked with a look that suggested surprise, but not genuine. Pity. I trust you are feeling better now? Ashe nodded, wondering what Cornelia was plotting. I am much better, thank you. I could have sworn I saw you, she mused, tapping her index finger to her chin. It must have been your twin, she laughed, making Ashe feel more uneasy. For there was a man, silver hair, bright green eyes, shining from behind his mask, and looking absolutely striking in a plum-colored suit, gleaming with amethysts. Ashe's blood ran cold. She knew. He didn't know how, but Cornelia knew that she was Dimitri's mystery dance, that he'd been at the ball, danced with the prince, almost kissed. But if she knew, why hadn't she told Dimitri? Why corner Ashe in an empty council room under the guise of needing his help? The advisor continued. Perhaps you may still be able to help me. Her lips curved into a sly smirk as she handed him her tablet. Tell me, Lord Ubert, do you recognize this man? He looked at the tablet, and his stomach flipped at the image that greeted him. It was him, Ashe's own face, years younger, eyes harsher and colder from a life on the streets, robbing and stealing to provide for his sister. This picture, his mugshot, was taken the night before he broke into Lenato's home, the night that changed his life, luckily for the better. There were times, though, late at night, when this image and memories of the past haunted the back of his mind. Why are you showing me this? He asked, barely a whisper, though it echoed like a shot in the empty council room. Think of this as a, friendly reminder, Cornelia sneered, the last words dripping with venom. The prince does not think too highly of liars and criminals. Ashe smiled, forcing himself to keep up the charade of politeness. Of course, he acknowledged. From somewhere deep within him, he found the remains of the courage he had the night of the ball. His Highness is a tolerant and forgiving leader, though. He would not pass harsh judgments upon his subjects without knowing the full story first. Cornelia gritted her teeth and snatched the tablet from his hands. You will not want to test me, boy. You have no leverage here. One word from me, and the prince will know all about your delinquent past, and how you've been deceiving him, lying to him, just to get the throne. No, that's not true. Ashe clenched his hands to fists at his sides. Oh, but it is if I say it is. Who shall his highness believe, His trusted adviser, or a common street rat with nothing to his name that he did not steal? Ashe ground his teeth, tears starting to gather behind his eyes. Cornelia was right in one regard. Without Lenato, he was nothing. A boy forced into a life of hardships by circumstances that were beyond his control. He had robbed and cheated his way through life, trying against the odds to provide for his family. Dimitri would understand, wouldn't he? But even if Dimitri would be the kind, tolerant, just, and forgiving leader he hoped he would be, like his father before him, everyone else would be much less forgiving. The court of public opinion, the Council of Lords, they would be Ashe's judge, jury, and executioner, and he would figuratively hang for his past injustices, not to mention the mark it would leave on Dimitri's reign. If Ashe's past were to be revealed in this way, it would do nothing but destroy everything Dimitri was working to build, a kingdom and a rule worthy of the bladed legacy. Ashe could not be the reason all of Dimitri's hard work went to waste. Resigned to reality, he knew what needed to be done. What do you want, Cornelia? He asked, dropping the polite noble act, his anger and frustration coloring the council chamber. Cornelia smiled like a cat toying with the mouse caught in her trap. It would do you well to stay away from his highness, and stay out of my way. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, bringing their meeting to an end. Cornelia straightened herself, satisfied that her message had been received. Thank you for your insight, Lord Hubert, she said joyfully, back to her performance as the courtesan's adviser. She gathered her belongings and papers and made to exit the council room. She stopped next to Ashe and spoke a final nail into his heart. His Highness is grateful for your cooperation. Ashe nodded and forced himself back into his noble act. Of course, Lady Cornelia. I am honored to be of service. Cornelia nodded a final time and left Ashe alone in the council room, door closing behind her with a slam that echoed through the palace with a sense of doom and finality. Ashe turned and braced himself on the table, tears dropping onto the wooden surface, a steady stream of his anger and frustration. Ashe made a decision before he set foot outside of the council chamber. He needed to keep his space from Dimitri, or Cornelia would be his undoing. The council session ends in 3 weeks, but a group of Gaspard assistants would be returning within the week to prepare for Lenato's return. Ashe would accompany them. He told his father over dinner that night. Are you sure, Ashe? Lenato asked, confused. I believe there is still much to be gained if you were to remain at court. I understand. I guess I'm just a little more homesick than I anticipated. His father nodded sagely. It happens to all of us. You will eventually adapt, and the time away will feel like nothing at all. Very well, then. I'll make sure Celia and the others know of your intentions. Ashe gave a small nod, silverware clinking against his plate. Ashe? Ashe looked across the table at his father. Lenato smiled at him. I'm very proud of you, son. You've been a great help to me this session, and a valuable voice for Gaspard in my place. Ashe felt a blush rise in his cheeks. Even after all these years of living with Lenato, he still wasn't accustomed to such free-flowing praise. I'm just doing my duty, he said. Before Lenato could respond, Celia entered the dining room, drawing both men's attention. Pardon the interruption, my lords. Ashe, you have a visitor in the sitting room. Oh, thank you. Tell them I'll be just a moment. Celia nodded. He said no, Ashe. He'll wait for you. She curtsied and left the dining room. Ashe finished dinner and excused himself to see the guest in the study. Celia had not told him who exactly was waiting for him, as she liked to do for some mischievous reason. He didn't really mind, but sometimes it was nice to have a small heads up. He knocked on the door to the sitting room and waited a courteous moment before entering. Oh, that's why she didn't tell him who his guest was. Dimitri, Ashe greeted, closing the door softly behind him. Hi. The prince turned at the sound of his name, smiling softly. Hello, Ashe. I apologize for the lateness of the hour. I was in the neighborhood, so to speak, and I felt that one last stop on my journey couldn't hurt. Unless you are busy. No, Ashe assured him. Not at all. I'm glad to see you. Dimitri nodded. I feel the same, though I do have a bit of official business to attend to while I'm here. Ashe motioned to the chairs and coffee table. Please, take a seat then. Business first. Thank you. The pair sat around the coffee table, chairs adjacent. Once settled, Dimitri got straight to the point. I'm sure you've heard the gossip surrounding the ball last week, yes? Ashe's heart skipped a beat as he nodded. Something about a mysterious nobleman and a dance, right? Yes, exactly. Dimitri sighed. The prince reached into his breast pocket and produced a ring. Ashe's ring. The one that had slipped off his fingers he ran away from the ball that night. The nobleman lost his ring, Dimitri continued. I've been asking around. I was wondering if maybe you recognized it, or knew someone who had lost it. Ashe took the ring and pretended to study it. He knew the ring, obviously, and he had hoped his face didn't betray him. He shook his head and handed it back. Sorry, I don't recognize it. It's a lovely piece of jewelry, though. I'm sure he'd be glad to have it back, especially knowing you've taken such good care of it in the meantime. Dimitri nodded in resignation. I do hope I find him someday, if only to return it. The prince sat back in his chair and tented his fingers. I've been torn as of late. On the one hand, I want to meet them. It felt different, dancing with him that night. The prince laughed. That probably sounds crazy. How can you feel a connection to someone without knowing a thing about them? Ashe shrugged, hoping Dimitri couldn't see him shaking. It's like a story. The prince, a mysterious man, a dance. I think it's quite romantic, personally. Not crazy. Dimitri smiled. I'm glad you think so too. Yet, there is my dilemma. Whether to spend my time searching for this mystery man or to take a chance on a man that I already know. Ashe's heart skipped another beat. I'm afraid I don't follow, Dimitri. Dimitri reached across the table, taking Ashe's hands in his own. Ashe, I hope you will not think poorly of my forwardness, but I wish to get to know you better. Ashe stared at him. What do you mean? He asked, prompting for confirmation that this means what he thinks it means. I would like permission to court you. Ashe's heart thundered in his chest. The prince was interested in him. Romantically. He can scarcely believe it. His mind raced through memories of the past week, long looks across the council room. Had Dimitri been staring at him too? Tea and pastries and conversations in the garden? Had it been more than royal hospitality? The ball, where they shared a dance that Dimitri didn't even know they had. The prince does not think so highly of criminals. Ashe tensed. Cornelia's voice echoed in his head, pushing the blissful thoughts away from the harsh reality. Ashe was a commoner for all intents and purposes. His past is dark, and even though he feels regret for what he had to do to survive, would Dimitri be able to look beyond that? It would do you well to stay away from His Highness. Ashe? Ashe blinked, brought out of his reveries by Dimitri's voice. The prince moved closer and placed a comforting touch on his shoulder. It wouldn't have to be a formal agreement, at least right away, Dimitri continued, unaware of the spiral of thoughts in Ashe's head. Above all, I want you to be comfortable. There is no pressure of expectation. Dimitri, Ashe hesitated. His heart was screaming yes, but his mind was louder, reminding him of the conversation with Cornelia. You will not want to test me, boy. Dimitri's eyes shone bright as his smile, blue like the purest sky on a sunny afternoon in Gaspard. Ashe could easily imagine walking hand in hand with Dimitri through the city streets, showing him all the best things about where he grew up. It's magical. He wants this with Dimitri. And yet, Ashe pulled away from the prince's grasp. Dimitri, I'm flattered, truly, but I'm afraid I can't return your feelings. The prince's eyes darkened like a sudden summer storm, and Ashe had to tear his gaze away, unable to look at the rejection he placed there. I'm returning to Gaspard next week, Ashe continued, stopping any rebuttal Dimitri may have had, any pleas he may have made. Ashe's decision was final. He could not love Dimitri, and he was leaving at the first chance he got. Dimitri cleared his throat. I see, he acknowledged, trying to hide the hurt in his voice, but Ashe recognized it. As always, I appreciate your honesty. Thank you, Lord Hubert. Ashe flinched at the return to formality, the use of a noble's title. It sounded so foreign, coming from Dimitri's lips, and suddenly Ashe was back in the council chambers on day one, nervous and small, and clearly out of his element. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not even sure the prince could hear him. There was a knock on the door, but neither man moved to answer it. A polite moment passed before the door opened and Dudu stepped into the sitting room. "My apologies for the intrusion, Your Highness, but we must return to the palace." From the corner of his eyes, Ashe saw the prince nod in acknowledgement. "Yes, thank you, Dudu," he replied, voice wavering slightly. "I will only be a moment longer." The prince's vassal nodded once and retreated back into the hallway, door closing softly in his wake. "It seems our time has run out," the prince said solemnly, standing up from the chair. Ashe stood as well, out of formal habit, and forced himself to lift his gaze to look at the prince one final time, willing his tears not to fall. "Dimitri!" Ashe started, but was silenced as the prince placed a gloved finger to Ashe's lips. He then leaned towards Ashe and placed a chaste kiss on his cheek. A selfish and improper act, but Ashe couldn't find it in him to push the prince away this time. "I wish you a safe return to Gaspard," the prince said with a sad smile. "May our paths cross again." And with one final nod of his head, Dimitri turned and exited, leaving Ashe alone in the empty sitting room. Ashe stood there in the middle of the room, unable to move, tears finally streaming down his face. He didn't know how long he stood there, or what time Celia eventually found him, but when she embraced him, he fell to the floor, his heart feeling as though it were in a million pieces.